I know it's 3 o'clock. We're probably all fading. The good news is this will probably not go a full 30 minutes. But let me just start by asking, who has heard of blockchain, just so I kind of have a sense? And who has a working knowledge of blockchain and what it is and does? Okay. Now I'm going to test your honesty. Who could give a rip about blockchain? Nobody? Okay, great. Excellent. Buying you a beer at Graceland later. All right, so we're gonna dive into this. We kind of already gave our introductions. We won't spend a ton of time on that. But again, I'm Jason Provonsha, CEO of Steam Logistics. Brook Cummings is our director of exports. He's really more than that. He wears a ton of hats at Steam. We're kind of a scale-up type business, and we all have to kind of move around and do different things. So Brook does a lot with our technology and is really driving a lot of what we're doing from a technology standpoint at the business. You've already heard a little bit about Steam. We are a technology-enabled freight forwarder. We started this business about 6 years ago after a very successful run with a domestic truck brokerage called Access America Transport. Access America started in 2002, and over about a 12-year period, we scaled it to about $500 million in annual sales. Ultimately merged it with Coyote Logistics out of Chicago, who then sold to UPS for $1.8 billion about a year later. So Steam really began as kind of an offshoot of this domestic company. We've kind of gotten the band back together at Steam to try to recreate internationally what we did on the domestic side. And so we're about 6 years into it. We grow at about a 60% rate every year. We're doing that through our service model and through our technology in an industry that is pretty well established. So our growth trajectory is really based on grabbing market share from more established players. So the goal today is not for everybody to walk out of here with a PhD in blockchain because we don't have it either, but the goal is really just to do a few things. Really, we want to expose you to the technology, introduce some of the language and the concepts behind what blockchain is, and then just kind of help you be prepared as opportunities arise in your own business to potentially do some things within the blockchain space. So. And maybe a fourth goal would be to impress a millennial with your knowledge of a technology that they, condescendingly talk about at a cocktail party or something like that. So, let's start with just a basic definition. So, a blockchain is essentially a digital database that can be simultaneously used and shared within a large, decentralized network. Each of the computers in that network maintains a copy of the ledger to prevent a single point of failure, and all copies are then updated and validated simultaneously. And so blockchain is also the technology that makes Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies possible. Okay, do you have all that? Is everybody tracking? Let me just kind of break it down step by step. So if you were to kind of see this on kind of in a more linear fashion, blockchain is a transaction. So it begins with a transaction initiated between two parties. You're essentially transferring the ownership of something from one person to another. A block is then created by packaging with other transactions, and it's sent to a network of computers, and in their terminology, they would refer to those as nodes. The computers then evaluate the transactions through mathematical equations and then determine if those transactions are valid. Those transactions are then verified when consensus is reached amongst those computers, and it has to be at 51% or greater. Then verified blocks are time-stamped with a cryptographic hash that correlates to the hash marks of a previous block, and that creates a chain. That's the name blockchain. And ultimately, then the unit of value moves from one account to another. So if you can kind of think about that in terms of Bitcoin, you're transferring money through a series of events like that. Now we're going to kind of zoom out and then talk about what that might look like, in more of a supply chain point of view. But just to give you a little perspective on the potential opportunity associated with this, this is a pretty good quote from Marc Andreessen. Marc Andreessen is a billionaire investor and serial entrepreneur. He was the founder of the company that became Netscape, the first really commercially viable web browser. He's also the founder of Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the more influential and important venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. So his quote here is just that, the consequence is, for the first time, an internet user can transfer a unique piece of digital property to another one in such a way that it's guaranteed to be safe and secure, that everybody knows it's happened, and that nobody can challenge its legitimacy. And his point is that the consequences of this are pretty hard to overstate. So there's a ton of potential here. And it's being talked about like crazy in our space. And I think from our point of view, it's important that we understand what truly is real, what of it is PR kind of spin, and what are the real implications. So there's several kind of pilots being operated right now within blockchain. A few of the more high profile would be Walmart's doing something with their suppliers in the food safety side of their business. So they're able to use blockchain to track green leafy vegetables from origin all the way through to the supply chain to retail. So for them, it's a way to avoid foodborne illnesses like E. coli and things of that nature. Maersk and IBM are in a partnership, and they've probably been the loudest around pushing out content around how blockchain is going to be the future of this industry. They have a product called TradeLens where they have some early adopters kind of jumping in to be a part of this across carriers, terminals, shippers, forwarders. And then there's another kind of bigger kind of joint venture going on between Accenture, APL, which is an ocean line, Kuehne+Nagel, and InBev, which is Anheuser-Busch. And they're doing some things with digitizing bills of lading, and all of these things are picking up some momentum, but they're still very early. So Brook's going to tell you a little bit about some of the use cases that we're seeing from a supply chain standpoint.
So going back to what Jason said about blockchain, blockchain is transferring something from one party to another party, doing it in a very secure, doing it in a foolproof, a tamper-proof way, doing it pretty quickly. With that in mind, there's a lot of implications with the financial side, but also outside of financially within the supply chain space. So there's a few uses that are just kind of pop out from a logistics standpoint in electronic bills of lading, letters of credit, automated payments, smart contracts, of course, tracking and tracing, and document and record storage. So the potential benefits in the financial space. So you have a secure way of moving information from one place to another. Who here deals with a letter of credit? Part of the letter of credit process is that you have a third party that is verifying that the transaction for you. The money moves when the conditions are met. Part of that process, it's also very manual. There's the presentation of documents. You have to print out everything, sign it, print it, send it to the bank. Bank A qualifies it. They look over it, make sure it's correct, send it to Bank B, who looks over the same data, makes sure it's correct before it goes off to the buyer, who then sends the money, and then the money transfers back to the seller. In a blockchain environment with that letter of credit is that now you have a way to transfer that information quicker and more securely, reducing the amount of checking and double checking and looking over the same data multiple times to see if there's any discrepancies, and if there are, then offering up, do you accept, do you not accept, that whole process. There's also these things called smart contracts. Smart contracts are put in place. It is the transfer of a piece of information via a block, but that block has a program that sits on top of it that has a pre-programmed set of instructions that says when these conditions are met, this transaction will then move and switch from one party to another party. And that can be linked back to automated payments. So you have a contract between a buyer and a seller. The buyer says, as soon as this happens, I want my money. As a seller, you say, okay, I agree to these terms. You program that into a block. So as soon as certain conditions are met, that block is unlocked and the money is transferred. There's also, from an operational standpoint, with the bill of lading. Currently, the bill of lading is issued by the carrier. That document most commonly is manually keyed in once, twice. That data is coming from multiple different sources who have different computer systems, have different formats, different specs around that particular piece of data. In a blockchain type environment, that data is standardized. So it doesn't matter if you're shipping from the U.S. to China, U.S. to South Korea, U.S. to Zimbabwe. The format's the same. It's the same data being transferred. Also with that, blockchain also brings automation to those documents as well to help us streamline the process. We're not having to key data. The data is being transferred. The data is originating from the seller and is followed through all the way back to the buyer. And then, of course, from compliance. Again, we touched on that data is secure. It's foolproof. It's a decentralized network of computers. Because of this, you're able to trust the accuracy of the data that's in that block and the fact that that data has not been tampered with. And of course, everything's traceable because it's linked together. You can go back and see what happened, when it happened, who did it, and what time it was done.
So just to sort of wrap up from our point of view, we're very interested in this technology. We think it could do some interesting things in our space, and so we're going to continue to study it and not jump in full force. We think that it could add a lot of value. I think from where we sit, the biggest headwind is kind of universal adoption of certain standards, and it kind of brings in a debate around private versus public blockchains. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have public blockchains. Anybody can see this information. And there's reasons within a supply chain that you wouldn't want it to be that public. Supplier information being public isn't always something that people want. Customer information isn't always something that people want to have in a public environment. And so that sort of begs the question, if it's private, how much of a game-changing technology is this truly? And so those are all things that we're thinking about. I mean, what is it, a shiny new object that we chase because it's new, or is it something that's actually solving a business problem that we're experiencing? So how much pain really is it alleviating in our world? And it may be a lot at some point. Where we sit right now, it doesn't feel that way. So we're going to continue to look at it. No one is really operating this at any level of scale. I would say Walmart probably is probably the closest at this point. We are a little unclear about costs, so there's going to be scenarios around who pays for this and the value that brings. And so, our plan and what we would commend to you all as you think about this for your business is start small, find a use case. We're kind of looking at bills of lading and maybe that being the first little small bet that we place on this. And so we would encourage you all to think about it the same way. And obviously, if we can be a resource to bounce ideas off of or consult with you about those types of things, we'd be happy to do it. We are not sort of out there waving the flag on blockchain. We don't have any vested interest really beyond just trying to be a smart business person. So we would be a safe person to kind of talk with about that. We don't have any interest in it beyond just curiosity at this point. So. Again, we kind of kept this short because we thought it might generate some questions, and we knew it was late afternoon. So I don't know if we have time for questions. We're happy to answer them, and we're also happy to let you all go and get a little downtime before the next thing. So,
a couple minutes if anyone has a question specific.
How secure is it?
How secure is it?
I mean, from everything we have seen, it's about as secure as you can get.
It's with the blockchain, it's not there. That data does not exist in a centralized location. So once that block has essentially been tagged, it's set. That's the data. In order to change that data, you have to add another block. But that doesn't mean that original block is gone. So as far as the security, it's really from when you read about it and when you look and see who's pioneering this, security is kind of at the forefront of their thought, and how can they make a model in which they can transfer data from one place to another without the risk of that data either being corrupted, miscommunicated, or maliciously changed. There have within Bitcoin. Is that what you're referring to, or the cryptocurrencies? Yeah, the other cryptocurrencies. Yeah, and that's another reason why we're kind of slowly getting into this. Of course, Maersk is kind of pioneering this with IBM. If I don't know who ships with Maersk. They had an incident that happened to them about a little bit over a year ago, and officially took down their entire network. So the benefits do outweigh the cons there, but it is something that definitely you want to keep your eye on.
Yeah, and just to add, anything can be hacked at some level. So, that's definitely this isn't foolproof, but from everything we're reading, it's pretty solid compared to an open API or EDI connection, things of that nature. So.
You mentioned that there's no standards. Is there a group working on that now, or are there some people coming together to try to build a flow that you will?
Yeah, actually, there's a group that we're pretty friendly with. We're not part of it yet. We're looking at it. It's called BITI. Is that what? So there's an organization. Somebody had a slide up here today from FreightWaves. FreightWaves is a kind of data analytics business that focuses on supply chain and logistics. They're also based in Chattanooga, and they have started a kind of a forum that's bringing in shippers, industry professionals. It's pretty well established already, but I think if you Googled BITI or FreightWaves, you'd find it pretty quick.
The other question I have is a lot of the port handling software being public entities are fairly primitive, a lot of DOS-based stuff. A lot of it is, any technology improvements are probably limited because of, possibly some union contracts on jobs and those kind of things. How does this interface with those different technologies for security?
You can
I can take that. Actually, it's interesting that you'd ask that question. I sat in on a webinar forum just about a week ago with the JOC, and in there we were kind of talking. They were kind of talking about that same thing. We had people from the ports software company, and we also had I think it was the global operations lead for Hamburg Süd was in the call as well, and what they're doing is that there's a few standouts software companies that are kind of trying to establish themselves as that in between. And so they're third parties that are bringing all those systems together. The ports realize that they need to upgrade. They need to do something different. The steamship lines also realize that as well. Really, the benefit of bringing this type of technology, and also part of that conversation is not that blockchain is the answer to it. It's blockchain is just another tool in the toolbox to bring further automation and kind of bring them up to modern standards. But it is something that we hear it from Maersk, we hear it from other steamship lines. It's something that's very active in our space. And as far as the standardization, we just kind of have to see where it goes and just see who stands out on top.
Sure. Yeah, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.